Yeah, I think this may actually have been the intent behind this, to create a U.S. proposal, very specific, that on the surface appears to be reasonable and offers at least the possibility that Russia might accept it, in order to force Ukraine's hand. That when Zelensky says, hell no, we're not going to do that, then it gives Trump to say, okay, we've tried everything to, come up with an agreement, and the ones who are preventing it from happening are the Ukrainians. So we're done. That's one thing I heard repeatedly in Moscow from multiple sources, that this war will end once U.S. pulls out. Once the United States ends the CIA operations in Ukraine and the military support, the sharing of intelligence, and the provision of weapons and ammunition, Ukraine's done. They can't sustain it. I mean, right now, the math numbers tell the story. The casualties per month, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, killed and wounded, 40,000 a month. And it's been that way for the last 4 or 5 months at least. No, actually, it's been that way. It's been that way through all of 2025. So right now, the Russians are looking at having inflicted almost 500,000 killed and wounded on the Ukrainians in just 2025. Then these very, very pro-Ukrainian sites, the Atlantic Council, Institute for the Study of War, they're estimating that the number of desertions, monthly desertions in Ukraine, are between 20 and 40,000. Well, put those two numbers together. At a minimum, we're talking 60,000 losses per month. At the high end, 80,000 losses per month. And then you step back and say, well, how many new recruits is Ukraine rounding up every month? About 25,000, maybe. And those 25,000 aren't being sent to a training camp where they're spending 3 to 6 months in training. Good God, they're so desperate, they're slapping uniforms on them, giving them guns. They don't even know how to march in formation, and shoving them off to the front. Ukraine is in a death spiral right now, in my opinion. And this is one that's not sustainable. People thought, oh, well, from 2027, this can't go on that long, simply because Ukraine does not have the manpower. And I don't see NATO, even though there's some mercenaries that have still sort of filtered in, NATO's not going to be able to deploy forces to keep it going because of it. If they do that, then the war will expand into Europe, and European capitals and military bases will be hit and destroyed by Russia.
It's a strange thing, though. You mentioned that the war will end when the U.S. ends its support or cooperation with Ukrainian intelligence services.
Right.
But it begs a good question of why all of this has to be pressured on Ukraine to begin with, because this is a lot of this should be a deal between Russia and the United States, because we already know, as we had confirmed in the New York Times as well as the Washington Post, that the day after the coup in 2014, this is when the U.S. began, or the CIA and MI6 began to work with the intelligence services, which they had installed a new intelligence chief in Ukraine, and began to rebuild the intelligence services from scratch as a instrument of a tool against Russia. I mean, they already admitted all of this.
Yeah.
They admitted to the extent they seized control over the Ukrainian government as well. So it seems, and it's also confirmed that this was one of the key reasons why Russia decided to invade in 2022, that the US and British intelligence services had entrenched themselves so much in Ukraine. But it's very strange that in this 28-point peace plan, that it's referred to as a peace plan between Russia and Ukraine. But after Boris Johnson, Marco Rubio, everyone confirmed that this is a proxy war, and still, this is a key limitation. It's the same with the NATO membership, and I brought this point up many times before. why does Ukraine have to be forced to signing an agreement that it will not join NATO? I think the Russians would trust more if this came from the United States, because Ukraine can change its mind tomorrow. And so why not get a deal from the United States? It's very strange the way the whole diplomacy is working here. Do you know why the US is so insisting so hard on maintaining this idea, this auspices of being a mere mediator?
We're not good listeners. The Trump administration, and really the deep state, those that predated Trump, in the CIA, in the Pentagon, and the Defense Intelligence Agency, they've got this narrative about why Russia is doing what Russia is doing that is completely divorced from the reality. And in fact, this 28, Russia talks about root causes. The fundamental root cause of this conflict is the expansion of NATO to the east and surrounding Russia with offensive weapons. The Aegis so-called air defense systems that were deployed in both Romania and Poland are quite capable of carrying nuclear-tipped missiles. And so, Russia takes that as a very, very serious threat. So when you go through that 28-point document, and I posted it at sonar21.com and did some analysis on certain of the paragraphs, there's one of the points is that NATO basically can deploy all of its combat aircraft that will be based in Poland. Well, Russia's not going to say, okay, no. Russia's not going to go for that. And apart from that, other than saying there will be guarantees that Ukraine won't join NATO, there's nothing to address the issue of NATO's expansion other than a promise. We double dare dog promise that we'll never expand any more to the east. Russia's heard that before, repeatedly. And they know it's not you can't trust any promise out of the West. There's got to be some concrete commitment, which means shuttering bases and withdrawing forces. I think that's what Russia will insist upon. So until the West comes to grips with with recognizing that, look, this entire conflict is all about Ukraine's role with NATO. It has nothing to do with the Russian desire for Ukrainian territory. During my time, my recent visit in Moscow, I had a chance to interview Vasily Prosorov. Prosorov, he was a former colonel in the SBU, the Ukrainian Security Service. He was actually, it turns out he was a Russian asset. He started cooperating with the Russian intelligence services in 2014, and then he defected to Russia in 2018. And, I asked him extensively about the role of the CIA that it has played in Ukraine. And it goes back, 25 years or more. The CIA has been actively developing, recruiting, training, etc. These different Ukrainians as a way to, gain influence, up to and including having CIA office in the headquarters of both GUR and the SBU. So the West has yet to recognize that NATO is the problem. That's the key. Solve NATO, then you bring it into the war.
So where do you expect this to go from here on, though? Because it could be an opening to at least sit down and talk again. Because last time it appeared that Trump was making these remarks that the Ukrainians and Russians should fight it out first, assuming that, I'm guessing, if the war began to move decisively in one direction or the other, then there would be more willingness to make compromise.
Yeah.
But as we see, there's not much reason left anymore. At least in Europe, they're recognizing increasingly that the war is lost, and you can't really turn the thing around. But nobody is prepared to look at any kind of peace. If you look towards Kaja Kallas, for example, the EU foreign policy chief, who argues that we want peace, but peace has to first mean weakening Russia. So we have to have more sanctions, more weapons. Like, we don't have to talk to Russia, but they have to be weakened. This is peace. So it doesn't seem like there's any reason there. I mean, if I was advising the EU and you see that it's getting worse, the deal situation on the front line, thus also the political settlement will get only worse day by day. So you want to strike a deal today. Nonetheless, this isn't really happening. So what do you think is going to happen from here on? Will it just be Trump trying to put as much pressure on the Ukrainians and the Europeans? Because I saw, I think he also threatened to put harsh sanctions on Russia soon, which would then reduce the pressure on Ukraine. So it's very confusing what's actually happening here.
Yeah, if European threats and rhetoric were candy and nuts, it'd be Christmas every day, But it's idle talk on their part, because you have to step back and say, okay, what can they actually do? I mean, does Europe, Germany, France, the United Kingdom in particular, do they have an intact industrial base capable of producing the weapons that will counter what Russia is employing right now in the battlefield? Answer to that is no, they don't. Do they actually have a force structure with trained military personnel that they could deploy that could make a difference on the battlefield? The answer to that is no. So, and I had a conversation. Pepe Escobar and I we did this 2-hour interview. First hour was with Maria Zakharova, and then the second half is with Lieutenant General Abdi Aladinov, of the head of the Akhmat battalion. And General Aladinov, he said, look, he says the Europeans just never learn. He said in 1814, he said, hey, they attacked us in 1812, and we drove them out of Russia. And in 1814, we went to Paris to correct them. He said the Germans did the same thing to us, both in World War II and the Great Patriotic War. We went to Berlin. So if Europe continues to go down this path, we'll go wherever we need to go to put an end to it, because we're not going to live under this threat. We will address it militarily if necessary. It's very matter of fact, not belligerent, not threatening, just saying, look, the history is what the history is, and the Europeans better learn from the history. The Russians got zero interest in capturing and conquering Europe because they got enough territory. Their territory covers 11 time zones. They got more than enough territory, land to deal with. They're not looking for more land. They don't need more land, and there's nothing that Europe has that they need, including champagne. Russians in the Crimea, they're making their own good wines these days, so they don't need France for that. It is the kind of thing that the West antagonism is trying to compel the United States to enter the war. That's what they calculate is their only strategy they can succeed. If the United States gets involved, then maybe they have a chance. And if I'm the Russians, it's not just the threat that's emanating out of Ukraine vis-a-vis NATO. You have to look through the Caucasus, through Georgia, Western attempts to destabilize that government, Western efforts in Armenia and Azerbaijan to get a foothold so they can turn against both Russia and Iran. These recent entreaties to the to the stands, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. The West continues its effort to try to surround Russia for both weakening it and breaking it up into constituent parts that the West can readily exploit. That, I tell my Russian friends, they better understand that. That's what's going on. Neither the United States or Europe have any interest whatsoever, zero, in saying to Russia, hey, you know what? Let's be friends. Let's be friends on an equal basis. There's nothing we want from you. There's nothing you want. It'll be a positive sum game, and we'll respect you. We'll respect you as a country, and we'll stop trying to subvert you. That's never going to happen. The West they're addicted to destroying Russia like a crack addict is addicted to crack. And then, that's why, there's a lot of political theater that's going on. But I think the Russians pragmatically recognize right now they hold the advantage. They're winning on the ground in Ukraine. And there's not a thing that NATO or the United States can do to stop that. Not a thing.
Well, we know what the Russians want. I mean, their greatest fear is that that the war will simply be put on a temporary ceasefire, and then the NATO countries will find a way of restarting it later in more favorable conditions. So this is what they seek to prevent, either through a peace agreement which ensures that this won't happen, which would then be very harsh, or on the battlefield by seizing the territories that it can't afford being used as a future launch pad against Russia. And of course, the Ukrainian is also, it makes sense that they have a lot to lose no matter what they do now. As you said, the European goal is simply to get America dragged into this on the side against Russia, which is why it's very often a good idea to try to play along that we want a peace agreement, but frame it as an unconditional ceasefire or something that Russia can't accept, to make sure that Trump's fury is directed and pressure is directed against Russia. But what is it that you think the United States wants to achieve in this? Because some of the points in this agreement, seemingly concessions towards Russia, such as inviting Russia to return to the G8. I can't imagine this came from Moscow, because, the G7 has become a bit of a punchline, a joke in Russia now. I don't think, if you're negotiating a peace, I can't imagine Moscow asking this as something they want, to be invited back into the G8. I mean, if they were invited, sure they would send Lavrov or someone. But I can't. This seems like it would have been entered by the Americans. The Europeans don't want the Russians there. The Russians don't seem to have much interest in returning. So this is American. This seems like an American input. Is this an effort to integrate Russia into the unipolar system, or what is the thought process here?
So let me ask you this: do you have a professional hockey league in Norway?
Yes, I think so. I'm not following sport much.
Okay, well, I will use it as
an
example.
So.
So let's say that you've got this professional hockey league in Norway, and but they're really not very good, and you're one of the teams there, but now you've been asked to join a European hockey league that is much bigger, much better, and now here's the deal. Hey, Glenn, if you sign on to this, you can come back in and be part of this Norwegian hockey league. And you go, why would I want to do that? I'm a member of the European League. So here's the United States making Russia an offer. Yeah, we'll let you be part of the G8 again. Because right now, BRICS, it has more GDP than all of the G7 nations. BRICS controls more natural resources than all of the G7 nations. Yeah, come back and join a loser organization. I mean, the Russians got to laugh at that. I mean, it's ridiculous. But it reflects the delusion on the part of the Trump team, whoever crafted this, I guarantee you, probably Scott Bessent, really believed, the Secretary of Treasury, really believed that, oh man, Russia really wants to be part of our club because we're so powerful, we're so economically potent that they can't resist. They feel cut out. And one of the other elements in that plan is, well, we'll start off by considering gradually easing some of the sanctions. Russia's position is go, no, you end all sanctions now immediately. Another element in the proposal. So we're going to take those frozen assets that we stole from Russia, and we're going to give $100 billion of it to Ukraine to help build Ukraine. Russia's going, you're not taking our damn money. If we spend anything on Ukraine, we're going to make that decision, not you. So, I mean, there's issue after issue like this throughout these 28 points, but that's why I say it was written from the U.S. perspective. It reflects the U.S. understanding of the conflict or failure to understand the conflict. But Russia will sit down to talk it through. They're not going to say, we've read the document, there's nothing to talk about here. No, they'll talk it through. If nothing else, discussions will go on for 6 months, and Russia will continue to expand its territorial control in Ukraine. And then the military situation for Ukraine and NATO will be even worse than it is now.
Well, my last question then is, if you look into your crystal ball, how will this diplomatic game play out going forward? Because, as you said, it's there's fierce opposition from Zelensky and the Ukrainians. Some of these points also seem to, already crossing some of the things Russia would accept as well. And I think you were spot on with the money, especially that is having legitimizing the theft, not just taking the money, but then handing it over to Ukraine.
Yeah.
Even if I think sometimes we convince ourselves that Putin as a dictator can do what he wants. I mean, he needs to have some support from the political establishment in Russia. He can't. I find it very hard to see him present this deal. It's going to be very difficult for anyone to accept. And but again, as you began saying, it opens up a space for maneuver. And I think this is something Trump has become renowned for. No matter what he does, if he's proposing a Riviera in Gaza or whatever he does,
right,
he seems to always want to go and make a big splash to give himself some room for maneuver and shake things up a bit. I'm not sure if that's what he's going for here, but what do you see happening from here on?
Well, Russia is open. They'd like to have a normal relationship with Washington. Normal in terms of Cold War normal, where we had diplomats in each other's capitals. We had direct flights that you could fly to Moscow from New York or Washington, D.C. So you would talk. You didn't agree, for God's sake, because there was ample areas of where the war almost went hot. We were fighting Soviet expansion as we saw it in Central America and Angola and Afghanistan, and the Soviets were fighting what they saw as U.S. subversion attempts to infiltrate and destroy Russia. So it was that back and forth. Yet, with all that back and forth, you still talked. And even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, you had an ambassador there up on 16th Street at the time, just north of the White House, that they could talk. We don't have that right now. And there are a lot of very simple things that Donald Trump could do that could put the diplomatic relations on a normal track. One, reestablish direct flights from the United States to Moscow, vice versa. They haven't done that. Return the property that Barack Obama seized from the Russians illegally. Return that to them. And lift this ban on Russians only being able to travel 25 miles from Washington, D.C. I mean, hell, that doesn't even, that barely gets you north of Montgomery County, Maryland, or out into Farquhar County, Virginia. But haven't done that. And I think there is some real frustration. Maria Zakharova spoke to that, and she was genuinely frustrated by it. Like, we hear the words, but we're not seeing the actions. So the ball's really in Donald Trump's camp right now to figure out, are they going to try to normalize relations with Russia? Now, the problem is, as soon as he does that, there is this element in the Democrat Party and within the Republican Party that are going to accuse him of being a traitor, of selling out to the Russians, of surrendering to the Russians, of not being tough enough with them, on and on and on. So it's like this neoconservative crowd in D.C. is so entrenched, and they've got their hooks into the think tanks, hooks into the media, hooks into the military-industrial complex, that they're not about to allow normalized relations with Russia, because there's too much money to be made by continuing this conflict. Because if you take away Russia as this enemy that's going to justify tripling the production of Patriot missiles, etc., then who's the United States going to? How can we justify $1 trillion plus budget? So it's the economics of this, and this $100 million, that's chicken feed. Yeah, there's been $100 million worth of corruption on the energy sector, but the actual number of money that's been stolen from U.S. taxpayers and diverted, and some of it into the pockets of members of the U.S. Congress, House and Senate, we're talking over $48 billion. And that's being investigated now, but frankly, because some of the people who have received that money, prominent members, prominent Republicans and prominent Democrats, I don't see the investigation going anywhere to hold anybody accountable. Again, it's too much money that's been made. So the United States right now has no financial incentive to seek peace with Russia.
Yeah, part of my optimism, though, is, as you said, at least there's some talk. People
Right.
used to, at least during the Cold War, we talked to each other. And I think the part of the craziness in Europe is because it goes back to the idea that we no longer talk to the opponent. There is no diplomacy. Essentially, any deal the Russians put forward, or the Americans, such as this one, the main response is organized around this, basic idea is, we can't make any concessions at all, because any concession is a reward for Russian aggression. And if you reward aggression, then you will only incentivize further aggression. But this whole idea that it rewards aggression is premised on the idea that this was an unprovoked invasion, that it was opportunistic. But again, it is quite absurd. If the information is overwhelming that this was not unprovoked by any stretch of the imagination. But we given that we don't have any contact with Russia, no diplomacy, there's banning of the media, there can't be any mutual understanding. So at least if this forces people to sit down and talk, it could be something. I mean, the Europeans now keep repeating the other line that, there can't be any deal without involving Ukraine and the Europeans. Of course, the Europeans don't want to sit down and talk to the Russians, so it's quite ridiculous. But maybe this could spark a wider diplomatic effort, or more likely, of course, I think just the U.S. and Russia will ignore the Europeans. But it is no, I don't know. I see a lot of flaws there. The fact that none of the sides seem to be able to accept this deal, obviously that's a key flaw, but
Right.
at least there's some reason for optimism again, if there is some of the diplomatic path has been revived. Although I must say, I also think that this war will more likely be resolved on the battlefield. But again, I'm hoping that I'm wrong. But
Well, yeah, but I think you're right. You'll be proven a prophet. Look, there is this growing widening gulf between European leadership and the European people. The average voter in Germany is not going to Friedrich Merz and going, "Oh man, yeah, go get those Russians." Same thing actually in Poland. Same thing in France. Same thing in the UK. So you've got this complete divorce from reality between people and policymakers. And frankly, you start to see that actually in the United States. Trump's base is shredding quickly. His America First policy is one that is genuinely believed by a number of people, and they see Trump as betraying that across the board, betraying it not only in Ukraine, betraying it with Israel in particular, but betraying it as well as Venezuela. But instead of bringing about peace, he's seen as provoking war. So he's not in a strong political position. And what makes the U.S. so disturbing in all of this is that the moneyed elements that are profiting off of the war, they've got every incentive to keep it going, no matter that it's going to cause enormous damage to the United States. We're already generations behind in certain weapons categories to Russia, and the political winds in Russia are pushing for moving east. I spent some quality time with Sergei Karaganov, and Karaganov in his writings has been one of the biggest advocates for a move to the east, to Siberia, to Asia, recognizing that that's Russia's future. Because what does Russia need from Europe? What does Europe have to offer? People with blue hair and green hair and weird sexual behavior. They don't have resources to speak of. They're not making some miracle product or technology that Russia needs. It's really, Europe is sort of like that relative you have who's an alcoholic and unemployed and wants to come live with you. Who needs the drama? So, Russia is, I think they recognize their futures with China, with Iran, with Indonesia, with the global South. And it's not tied up in Europe anymore. And, that ship has sort of sailed.
Yeah, I published a book a decade ago with the title Russia's Geoeconomic Strategy for Greater Eurasia. And actually, Sergei Karaganov, he wrote the foreword and gave me a job in his department in Moscow, which actually focuses on this. Well, again, the thesis of my book more or less was the same, that all the systemic incentives suggested that Russia would from now on begin, that its military would point westward as a deterrent against the West, while all its economic instruments of power, that is tech cooperation, the supply chains, transportation corridors, currencies, development banks, payment system, everything else will be pointing towards the east. And I think this is the direction that they're going. And it's again, it's not a wishful paper. It's just a book, just an argument in terms of where the strategic interests are of Russia. And I think, unfortunately, in Europe, we help to shape this these incentives for Russia. But no, it's I think
Well, hey,
a lot of mistake has been made.
Let me interrupt you. Put a link in your video to that book. People should buy that book. You were again. We'll change your name. You'll become Glenn the Prophet.